Hello, and thank you for listening to Mapping the Zone, a podcast dedicated to informal discussion of the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. My name is Kate. I'm one of the co-hosts.
My name is Cody.
I'm Will.
And I am Luke.
And this week, I got the page numbers. What chapter numbers are we on, Cody?
16 and 17.
16 and 17 of Against the Day. We're all together again for the first time in quite a while.
I know, right?
Which is great. So, for the first time, I can ask all three of you, what were your thoughts on these chapters? But before we get to that, I do want to take a quick pit stop and ask Luke if he has a summary for us.
I do have a summary. It's a little bit shorter than usual, but yeah. Although his family life is falling apart, Webb Traverse has achieved himself a promotion. Despite this accomplishment, one day his daughter Lake runs off, and when she shows back up to the Traverse household, she's proudly holding a wad of bills. She says that she won the money betting on a fight. He says that she is a child of the storm who got the money from whoring, and an argument ensues. Once the fight threatens to turn physical, Lake is forced to leave home, so she heads back to the big city to resume her life as a sinner. She often finds herself plotting out Webb's demise as she goes about her day, and eventually even Webb's wife, Maba, finds the wherewithal to leave him and join Lake in Silverton. So, Webb pours himself into his love for the mining union, a love that is a hem less than two-way, as they force him to hire on to the torpedo workings over in... And then it's like... I actually looked up the pronunciation for this, like, Uncompahgre? I'm not sure that's the exact pronunciation.
That's how I pronounce it, yeah.
Yeah, I looked it up and it's actually different than that, I think, but it's because it's some like Native American word. Anyway, so there he soon meets and begins to bond with a man named Deuce Kindred. Deuce, however, is not the regular mine worker he seems to be. Rather, he is working as an agent of the mining company, and his mission is to destroy Webb as creatively as possible. Next, we get to meet Deuce's sidekick, Sloat Fresno, who himself thinks that Deuce is his sidekick, and not the other way around. Deuce begins to think of himself as a sort of undercover detective, but Webb likes to think of him as a sort of replacement son, and they soon become so close that Webb even mentions the thought of hooking Deuce up with his estranged daughter. Finally, after all that foreplay, Sloat and Deuce begin to torture Webb, not for information, seemingly, but as punishment. Deuce is intent upon demoralizing their victim, while Sloat focuses on inflicting as much pain as possible, and following a severe beatdown, Deuce and Sloat load Webb up on a horse and start their journey to Utah, where the torture will surely continue. Then on we move to Chapter 17. Reef and Frank head out Utah-wards for unknown reasons. They soon arrive in Nochecita, where a pregnant Estrella Briggs awaits them. Another lovelorn beau arrives in town, Cooper, who is about 7/8 the size you would apparently expect, and he starts singing a song ostensibly meant to woo his former lover and Stray's friend, Sage. Next, Frank experiences a late-night meet-cute with the local schoolteacher, Lynette. Then Frank has a frank discussion with Stray about his brother, Reefer, and the marital prospects of her friend, Sage. Frank and Stray share a seemingly romantic moment, at least from Frank's perspective, before Stray is called away. Reef finds himself next to a ringing telephone, and, wouldn't you know it, the call is for him. Jimmy Drop is on the line with the news that Webb has been kidnapped and is being held in Jeshimon, inside a day's ride away from Nochecita. The brothers argue about who is going to go after Webb and who is going to look after their mom and sister, and after saying goodbye to Stray and Cooper, both of them end up leaving town. They travel together as far as Mortalidad, then part ways.
Okay, so what did we think of these two relatively brief chapters?
Yeah. So I'll preface this by saying an apology to the listening folks out there that my audio might not be as good as normal. Part of the reason I've been away so long, my wife and family and I are moving. So we've been spending a lot of time boxing up and packing up, and it's just taken a lot of my ability to do this kind of stuff. So I don't know where my normal recording stuff is. So now here I am on my laptop, just making the most of what we can. So apologies if it's bothersome for anyone, but I'll do the best I can. So, anyways, as far as these chapters, I enjoyed them. They're pretty lean as far as stuff to dig out from them, and at least compared to other sections of this book and work. But it's really doing a lot of table setting for some things that are going to come down. Not going to get into what will happen later throughout this section of the book, just for anyone who hasn't read it, slowly reading it along with us at the same time.
Mhm.
But it does introduce us to Sloat and Deuce, who are among my favorite of John's antagonists. And this little part of the story with them and Webb, uh, it becomes one of my favorite sections of it. And so I'm really excited to get more into that over the next few chapters. Talk about that. Feels about all that as it comes through, but I have to restrain myself getting too far ahead and spoiling it. That being said, there's as usual, there's some good writing, a few really cool historical references, but overall it's not doing a whole lot of heavy lifting, and that's perfectly fine for a 1,000+ page book. Doesn't need to always be doing that. We gotta have these kind of calmer moments to kind of push the story along gently. And
What makes them some of your favorite antagonists, just out of curiosity?
uh, I think they play well off of each other, and that's set up in this chapter where it talks about the different, how I can't remember which one is which right off the top. One is more mentally abusive, the other is more physically abusive.
Mhm.
Um, so I think there's an interesting dynamic that goes on between them, especially in what their roles are as characters. Um, but then their importance to the story later is also a big part of it. So I can't go too far into.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I would agree with you as far as these two chapters are um pretty interesting. Not too much heavy lifting to be done with them, and that's perfectly fine. There's been a lot of heavy lifting for like basically the past like 50 pages of the
Yeah,
book. So certainly another instance of Thomas Pynchon kind of switching gears where something is difficult or something is harder, and then he kind of rewards the reader by giving them a bit of a break from that. Um, so it certainly is uh, an enjoyable set of chapters, an easy to read set of chapters, and at the same time building upon previous characters and ideas that he's been kind of continuously sort of circling around. The way that this book is structured is pretty interesting in the way things get introduced, and then there will be a chunk of time where seemingly they're not relevant, and then it gets roped back in, and so on and so forth with all of these different layers. This is a cool
Mhm.
sort of example of that reincorporation taking place. But also just like you can kind of see the writing on the wall, especially given the fact that the beginning of the first chapter starts with the introductory phrase "by the end,"
Yeah,
um, and that kind of on its own sets sort of the tone for at least the first chapter. Um, and then, yeah, the interplay between those two villains I found particularly interesting in the way that they both believe that they are the other's sidekick, um, and just kind of the way that they take different roles and how they sort of work people over, so to speak. But also the fact that they are doing what they're doing for seemingly no reason at first, in the sense that they go and capture Webb because he seems like he would be valuable based upon the information that he has to know, rather than them actually making any kind of money off of it. So there's an interesting motivation too in what they're doing at first as well. And
yeah, they
then
certainly get enjoyment doing.
yeah, yeah, it's not necessarily purely money motivated, but it's nice if
Yeah.
they can get it. And then the way that those elements then carry over into the second chapter with how we learn that Reef and his brother learn about what's happened to their dad is also just as satisfying, with a bit of a detour in the beginning of the chapter. So they're pretty straightforward, but an enjoyable break from what I would say the last 50 to 75 pages has been.
Yeah, it's good pacing.
Yeah.
My thoughts on these chapters are going to diverge a bit. Not terribly so, but these are less dense chapters, and we're not talking about covering thousands of miles on sail or by sail in them. These chapters are kind of like the epitome of a rock in a hard place to me. Reading through them,
Mhm.
not in an experience sense, but just in the trying to understand these characters, trying to understand the world they live in. It's over 100 years ago, and it's all of them are living very different ways of life in very deeply subtle ways than any of us do today, and it is so hard to orient one's feelings with regard to all of these people who are collapsing in on themselves, in terms of their motivations and in terms of their that what they believe themselves to believe in. And it's troubling in that way, and the only solace I can find in it is Pynchon coming clean as a Thatcherite, and a big fan of gun rights overall. I don't think there's any other interpretation of these two chapters other than that very clear message. But
a very objective way of reading these chapters.
Exactly. But no, it's just they are fun in the micro scale. It's just all together, as simple as they are just deeply sad, to me.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I like to echo the whole deeply sad thing. I mean, especially the ending of chapter 16, with Webb holding on to dear life, and that phrase, like the light fading from the mountains or fading from the ranges, or I forget exactly what it is. We'll get there. But these chapters, like as we've already been over, are kind of more transitional, set up stuff to come. And once we get there, I think we'll look back on these chapters and kind of appreciate them more, or the reader might. I know that one of the few things that has kind of stuck with me through like the last 10, 12 years since I read this book for the first time is some of the stuff these two chapters set up, which I'm kind of dancing around spoilers, but it's one of the stuff that this sets up, which we'll get there in the next few weeks, is some of the most memorable like events. I don't want to overstate it perhaps, but it really sticks with you what this foreshadows. I will say that. I don't know, and chapter 16 is just I like it a lot. I mean, I like both these chapters a lot. They're not going to be anyone's favorites from the book. The prose is a little bit lighter, not as dense. In chapter 17, I found myself today reading it kind of thinking about how easy it is to picture everything that goes on in chapter 17. I haven't seen a whole ton of like westerns and stuff, but it does. Pynchon writes even just down to like the dialogue and the way people talk in chapter 17, all the way up to like the scene descriptions and everything. It's obvious the Pynchon has done some research into what the Wild West would have looked like, and it does make me wonder like what a purely Western novel by Pynchon would look like. I mean, this book does have a good amount of elements of the Western genre, but it would be I think Pynchon would write like a very good, perhaps even amazing Western novel, or maybe even like a Western screenplay or something. Because he obviously has a lot of love for that genre, and that seems to kind of shine through in chapter 17, especially.
Have you? I'm sorry to cut you off, Luke. Have you read Warlock by Oakley Hall?
And I have seen a bunch of different references to how much Fincher loves that novel, though, right?
Yeah, it's so I've read it, and it. I mean, it's been a few years since I read it, but it definitely you can see where he got his inspiration for westerns from because it's. I think so many people conflate westerns with sort of like Louis L'Amour, um, really dime store kind of color and paint by number plot stuff. Um, Warlock is a fantastic, and it's about maybe the closest western to be written by Pinchon that I could think of, and it's clear that he was, he loved that book, and that really shines through in today.
So, chapter 16 brings us back to Webb Travers himself, and we now know that at this point he is working as a shift boss at the Little Hellkite mine. And we kind of rejoin him as his daughter suddenly comes home after having sort of disappeared for a while. And she not only has come back, but Lake has also returned with what is described as a bundle of U.S. currency that she claims she has won betting on a boxing match or a fight of some kind. Of course, Webb does not believe this and accuses her of going out and working as a prostitute in the local town. What do we think about this interaction? It's Webb is an interesting character because it is very clear that he cares a lot, both about his children, but doesn't know how to show it, but then also about his work within, sort of the union, and has basically at every turn managed to kill his relationships with his kids. And I kind of want to start there because who Webb is and how he relates to sort of his children is ultimately, of course, what drives him towards his eventual destruction and getting close to and sort of spilling his guts to who ends up being a wannabe company spy.
Yeah, I think it's hard with Webb because he is. I think he's a well-intentioned character. He just doesn't know how to express that, and so it tends to come off in a very kind of hostile and overly defensive manner. Like you said, he clearly cares about his daughter, about his wife, but he gets so worked up in wanting to protect them that he loses sight of what it is he's trying to do, and he becomes
Mhm.
the aggressor. And it's hard to watch someone like that who, and I think this is a really good example of these kind of characters that Pinchon do. Is he's not a great guy, but we still want to root for him because we know deep down inside he means well. He's just so bad
Mhm.
at managing his emotions and understanding how to convey his concerns that he just kind of goes into a fugue state almost and just
Mhm.
becomes a raging asshole.
Yeah, I especially like the inclusion of the line on 190 where it says, "Only understood later that it was fear of this young female spirit who only yesterday would come wriggling dirty-faced into his arms." That, like, there is something very distinct about his lack of connection to his own emotions and his own ability to kind of understand who he is and how he's feeling that then cascades out to others, which of course I
Yeah,
think has a nice element of reincorporation once we're introduced to Deuce,
yeah,
who's
his
sort of
kindred.
introduced as someone who was a sickly child, and
Mm,
instead of kind of adopting the stiff upper lip of sort of a Teddy Roosevelt, kind of took a different path to get over that.
yeah,
Um, the two of them, I think, make an interesting sort of emotional pair in that regard. But
yeah,
go on, Will. Sorry, you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just basically gonna agree. I mean, the thing that is so frustrating about Webb is that we've seen multiple times so far, and in this chapter, that he does have an immense capacity for understanding and for communication. it's just that all of that energy of trying to understand and of trying to convey is so wrapped around like this paranoia, because we're introduced to the man through this incredibly overwrought, byword communication of, the tenets of anarchism early in the book. And, you see him have these subtle, very, very pushing the envelope conversations with Deuce as they meet each other. And even here, where he's interrogating Lake about, what fight did she bet on? How did it go? That is communication, and it is understanding, and it is seeing what people's intentions are, but it's not taking them. It's not taking like his own words seriously. It's not respecting the fact that he still needs to like meaningfully communicate, even if he can figure out what's going on.
Right.
And that's just like the start of the issues with his family. But it's so infuriating because he is clearly a responsible person who is capable of learning and of being being caring and being loving, but he just isn't.
Yeah. Well, and to go back to the quote that Kate pulled on, just a couple paragraphs before that, like kind of right before he really loses his temper, there's this line of Lake saying, "Pa, what in the hell does that mean?" She wanted to sound more confident. She was getting scared now. Saw him turning in front of her into somebody else. Like that little inclusion of just, she knows this behavior. She's seen this behavior, and she knows that this is not really who he is, but this is what he becomes. The sort of Jekyll and Hyde.
Yeah, I find Webb to be a very tragic character, especially in this initial scene. It's something that I've seen in my dad and my mom and in myself and in other people, where once kind of anger takes over, it's not only that you become a different person, it's you become like illogical, and your empathy kind of flees from you. And it's something that I've seen it like a lot. I mean, not that I don't. My parents are generally pretty understanding and nice, and the people I'm thinking of that can kind of flip a switch and turn into somebody else whenever they're angry are generally good people. But it's just very human. Webb's response in a both understandable and kind of not understandable way, where you hope that you would respond differently to your daughter doing something like that, where you hope you would, sit her down and be like, this, I don't, not that I don't, I don't know, but you would sit her down and be like, this isn't probably what you should be doing, instead of getting mad and threatening to hit her and throwing her out. But it's just very, very human, very kind of real to life. And it's something that I've seen just kind of over and over in my life with different people and inside myself. Everyone kind of, or no, maybe not everyone, but a lot of people struggle with this kind of, with the way, with responding with anger, and the way that Webb does, where like y'all were saying, he kind of becomes a different person. On a somewhat different note, I do really like the line, "As if possessed by something she had known and feared since before things had names." I'm sure that once Lake is I think the youngest in the family. And I'm sure that, whenever she was a baby, Webb probably got mad at her older brothers, and maybe Lake didn't, was too young to really process, what was going on. But she's always known that Webb has had that side of him, that illogical and angry side. And, it's just, I feel for Webb, I feel for Lake, I feel for Maeva. This is very tragic, that initial scene.
Yeah. There's also something in this that feels very much like old patriarchal conceptions of masculinity coming up against a changing world, in the sense that Webb certainly is in the way that he wants to kind of run his household, is a relic of at least contemporaneous to the time frame the book takes place in, a fading world, kind of as we talked about with the book beginning with kind of the death of the Old West and the like sort of arrival of modernity. Webb kind of represents a mentality of that older frame in the way that he wants to kind of run his household. And if you certainly asked anybody who would have had that patriarchal, framework of my kids don't say no to me, I'm able to yell at my kids, sometimes I'm able to hit my kids and my wife, but they would have this, belief that it was over protection, it was over making sure that there was sort of good guidance or a kind of logical upbringing being sort of held to in the home. And you have his daughter going out and making money. Technically, we don't know for sure at this point if she is a prostitute, but she has money of some kind, and she's getting it from the sort of local town doing something. That in and of itself in 1900 would still be pretty weird for women to have access to their own money and their own agency and to go out and do something to sort of provide for themselves. And so there is also a tension in that, I think, of sort of a old school mentality versus a changing world. And it's ironic that Webb can be both caught up in the frontline struggles of labor unions, which would have been very modern and very liberal and new in that world, while also simultaneously being scared about changes or growth in other ways.
Yeah.
And I think that certainly that is what leads him to be so interested in Deuce as a sort of proxy child, because none of his children went into the mines with him. They kind of all did different things, and this is an instance of somebody who could, in theory, be his kid, working actively in the same industry that he is, and so it's not a surprise to see that kinship kind of come up.
I'm glad you mentioned that because that gets into something that I was going to bring up on the next, I think it's 2 pages, is that this is a really good example of, again, as we've been talking about since the first episode of this series, this duality that exists with so many of the characters. And you have a shining example of this with Webb, where he is, on the one hand, he is an anarchist, he's a unionist, he's a dynamite enthusiast.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, he is this abusive, very controlling, and ultimately manipulating father and husband. And I think a big part of what triggers this is at the very beginning of this chapter when his daughter has been gone for a long time, comes home and has more money in her hand than he probably makes in a year. So immediately now he's feeling emasculated because he's not the breadwinner.
Mhm.
And he has no concept of where this money came from. We as the readers will find out where it comes from. But in his mind, the first place he goes, he refers to as a four-door girl, which is an old, I looked it up, it's actually a European musical comedy from the turn of the century, like 1899, I think. And it deals with, sort of these garishly dressed women who would be perceived as being prostitutes. That's where his mind immediately goes, is there's no way she could have earned this money doing anything else other than whoring herself out. But that's what it has. And so now he's upset about the fact that she's more money than him, that he thinks she's prostituting herself. And on top of all of that, kind of like what you said there just at the end about him, the reason he connects so strongly to Deuce is because Deuce works fine, and Webb's kids never did that. And it reminds me a lot of, for those who have watched The Wire, Webb is a lot like Frank Sabatka in that he is blindly loyal to his union and almost nothing else matters to him, regardless of the impact it has on his family. Like, he will distance himself from his kids and his wife because they're not part of that lifestyle. They're not a part of what he cares about, what he's passionate about. So once that opportunity is gone for them to join him in that, he basically cuts them off and blames them for their relationship falling. And we're seeing that happen in real time now with Blake. And that's what makes it so heartbreaking, because we care about Webb in the sense that he does seem like He is essentially fighting on the side of justice, trying to take down these corporations that are starting to form up. He's working actively with the unions, trying to get better wages for the workers. But at the same time, he's pulling shit like this. And it's that duality that exists within it. We all have to struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And to interject just kind of a weird kind of, I guess, what I describe as like interstitial tissue between these very material frameworks and these very cultural frameworks that we've been talking about this issue with. It's very the dynamics of patriarchy are a very weird thing, especially at this point in time. And the weird part of it is that like this is a family that, because of Webb's radicalism and because of his intentions as a professional, he has dragged them, basically across the country, and so they are all, they are all very atomized from their communities, and so for him, all that he has is his family and his union, but all that his family has is their family.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have, Lake running off as she really should, but historically the kid runs off and goes to another family member's house or to a friend's house, and eventually community badgers them into making up with their parent.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't necessarily make it good, but it does essentially maintain an equilibrium where these dynamics can maintain each other, and where the father, presumably is less likely to, actually raise their fist because of the fact that there isn't this intrinsic threat of abandonment, because of the fact that, well, not only is his daughter emasculating him by bringing in all this money and doing it in this way that is verboten, whether gambling or prostitution, it's still not a-okay in a union man's mind. But she is also capable of just leaving, just going somewhere else.
Yeah, that is very true. I mean, not to mention, like, if you want to add another wriggle onto this from the capitalism perspective too, like, not to mention that the industries of prostitution or gambling or all of the different vices that are on Blair Street usually cropped up because of the industries like the ones that Webb worked in came around nearby, like when they were building the transcontinental railroad. They basically had a floating town of prostitutes and bars and gambling houses that followed wherever the work was.
Yep.
With the mine being nearby, a town grows and builds itself up as long as that mine is there, and then naturally all of this stuff sort of flows out of the back of it. So yeah, it's a really interesting just sort of dynamic to investigate and interrogate as you kind of read through it, and it is also very representative of real life. Maybe the reasons behind why these things happen change. It's not too common now that someone working for a miners union's daughter runs off and comes back with a bunch of money and he accuses her of prostitution. But my father talked multiple members of my family out of their like chosen career ideas. And there are certainly still instances in which people have these exact family dynamics. So there's also just like, and I think that's what makes Webb's story so tragic, so sad, is that there is such an element of truth to it. That even if it isn't your own parents, the story that kind of Will just told as far as how these things sort of play out, it's something that we're all familiar with in one way or another. And even if it's just through other tropes or other uses of this kind of dynamic, that those things are founded in reality for the most part. And of course, this kind of portion of the chapter ends with Lake talking about how she would occasionally fantasizes about blowing her father up with a piece of dynamite, which really just sort of puts kind of the nail in the coffin as far as how sad this whole instance is. You know, you've alienated your daughter for no reason to the point where she would rather see you dead. And so kind of in an effort to heal things, Maeva, Webb's wife, goes into town and tries to, as it says here, save at least one of her children, which is again just another like very simple but very devastating line. And Webb is actively trying to get his wife to not do this, to not like go try to keep their family together in some way. He's just saying, yeah, it's just easier. Just let her go. Just let her go. You know, this isn't. There's no need for us to even worry about it. And there's a reaffirmation here based upon Lake's age that this should be about 1902. So she's about 20. And as a result, Maeva ignores him, decides to go and see his daughter, and we basically just get again just a really sad appraisal of his character from perspective of Lake just saying nothing you could have done. It was already on the way. Her mom is trying to kind of repair anything that she can. And then I think that the saddest line in this whole set of chapters is, and he still would have found some way to wreck it. Lake's face puffy as if just risen from the dream she could tell no one about. Older than her mother was used to seeing it. Emptier. I know you say you don't miss him, but God help you. How can you stay like this, unforgiven and all? We were never that important to him, Mama. He and his almighty damn union. That's what he loved if he loved anything.
Yep.
Do we have any thoughts on this interaction or just sort of this opening phase of the chapter at all before Webb meets Deuce?
I mean, it's just this little subsection chapter is just Webb turning on Maeva, just the way he turned on Lake.
Yeah.
That whole thing. Just, oh well, if you're going to agree with her, then you might as well just leave too. So it just kind of doubles down on what Webb has become as a person.
So looking for solace, Webb says sought the embrace of Local 63, and within there he meets this character named Deuce Kindred, who is described as having been one of those sickly youths who is more afraid of the fate all too obviously in store for weaklings in this country than of the physical exertion it would take to toughen up and avoid it. However, self-schooled in the ways of strenuosity, he had still absorbed enough early insults to make inevitable some later re-emission at a different physical frequency, a fluorescence of vindictiveness. He thought of it usually as the need to prevail over every challenge that arose, regardless of scale, from cutting a deck to working a rock face. What do we think of Deuce as our sort of first antagonist who's introduced in this chapter?
I mean, like I said at the beginning, Deuce and Sloat are some of my favorite characters in this book, and it kind of goes. I think that something Pynchon is really good at as far as his antagonist is there's always this element of darkness that has driven them to where they are, whether it's Deuce and Sloat or it's Brock Brond or any of the antagonists in Gravity's Rainbow. But they're always these sort of. I don't think self-made man is necessarily the right term. They are generally independently successful and have sort of built themselves into what they are outside of influence from someone else. They're usually, they had to go through some kind of struggle that forced them to grow up faster than maybe they should have. And as a result, they now have this viciousness inside of them and this sort of hatred for the world that they maybe think has abandoned them or that never gave them what they felt they deserved. So it turns them against everybody. And it makes for such interesting villains and antagonists who have these sort of what's the word I'm looking for? These really off-kilter views of the world. Yes, is the best. They are seeing this distorted reality that they think exists because it has shaped them, and that's all they really know. And so they use that and they feed into it, and it turns them against everybody who will not work. And I think that's part of what makes them so dangerous. Really, just have nothing to do.
I think that's the thing that makes me actually hate Deuce quite a bit. As much as I
I hate him.
understand.
Don't get me wrong. I
Oh
hate
no,
him. But I hate him. I love him as a character.
no, I got you. I just mean that like I even hate reading about him because like there I cannot remember. I want to say it's Gore Vidal's quote. I don't remember the exact phrasing, and that's good because I think it's also includes a mild slur. But you know, he's a coward with a gun. Those people are not fun to entertain in my mind. Like, dear Lord, they're the worst people. I went to a school with a lot of people going into the modern day mining industry. I knew a lot of cowards who would be blackout drunk playing with their guns. These people are horrible, and not to devalue any of what you said, Cody, because they make sense. They've usually gone through some tough shit, and they've had to deal with that, and the only way that they seem to be able to is to take all of that pain and push it out on everyone else, but in a way that but in order to survive they have to hide it. They have to pretend that they don't hate everything around them, and it lets people like Webb, who might, yes, as much as years of working in the mines, years of being chased around by the mine or the mine corporations, have like hardened him and made him, not able to connect with his family. Like he's not even like he's lost. He is in a moment of crisis, essentially. You could imagine. You can imagine him coming back from this point with his family. It's not likely, especially early 1900s. You can't imagine it happening, but it could. He's not foregone, but because he's willing to trust his union brother, and because Deuce is such a weasel. Yeah, it just undoes it undoes any potential there for healing in Webb as well as for Deuce. Because like obviously if you take out all of your pain on the world around you, you're not gonna be a better person tomorrow.
Right. Well, I think that's part of what makes those kind of characters and those people in real life so fear inspiring, is that they are dangerously charismatic, and they are very good at preying on people who they see could be an opportunity. That's all they see.
Yeah.
And I do like that in this case, Pinchon kind of gives you that 1 or 2 sentence summary of how he kind of ended up like this, from a perspective of like, yeah, he was a sickly child. He got made fun of a lot as a kid, and kind of instead of working his way, into maybe a more masculine archetype that could overcome these things, he instead decided to take another route. He became like smarter or craftier, or found a different way to go about things than the people who maybe bullied him. But because of the fact that he experienced that, he still has this streak of vindictiveness in him. Like, he did find a way to overcome his problems, but he did so in maybe the worst possible way that also gives him an internal justification to kind of get one over on everybody. And then I really like that idea of it has also given him a mentality of like, I need to overcome anything in front of me, regardless of scale. So it's interesting to get that sort of brief summary on him. And yeah, I would agree with everything both of you said about his character, and also sort of as a whole what makes a lot of Pynchon's antagonists or villains particularly interesting or compelling. So from there, we kind of get a little bit of some detail about sort of Webb trying to ingratiate Deuce into the kind of mind culture, and then also just sort of getting to know him. He points out who a inspector is versus a company spy, so on and so forth. And then eventually Webb runs into him gambling with someone who's kind of known to be a hustler. And this is kind of the moment where it turns from like a friendly co-working relationship, I guess I would say, into a kind of a weird thing where Webb is choosing to kind of try and take a fatherly role with Deuce. And he basically just says like, are you okay? What's going on? How are you doing in the game? Maybe be concerned about this particular guy. You don't want to end up being the fish, like trying to protect him. And that's where things change. And then Pynchon, in like an absolute feat of just sort of removing hope from his reader, follows up this scene with a scene where Deuce immediately afterwards is talking to a company representative about working for them as a spy.
Mhm.
So you really get this 1-2 punch of like, oh man, Webb's not okay. He's fighting himself a proxy child, to oh god, the proxy child's also not a friend. And it
Yep.
led to this moment where I was reading it in the living room and I went, oh no. And then like my partner immediately knew that something was deeply wrong and wanted to know what it was. And I was like, I don't have a great feeling about where this chapter is headed. And then it kind of gave her like the basic outline, and then certainly 30 minutes later or whatever, when my prediction was proved correct that it was not headed in a positive direction,
Mhm.
she was treated to a larger groan of sadness. um, so Deuce is actively choosing to get work from the company and to kind of ingratiate himself more to the power supply side of these working relationships. And is it's a tragic betrayal of a relationship that is parasocial. Feels like the wrong word. I'm sure there's a better one there, but what is essentially a parasocial relationship, with Webb getting far too invested in this person that he barely knows, and is
Yeah.
clearly using him to heal some inner pain that he has.
Yeah. It sucks because it's especially hard after coming off of watching Webb be a complete asshole to his family, and then now we have to be like, oh come on, he doesn't deserve it though.
Yeah, exactly.
I do think it speaks to like Webb's, like Webb has nothing else going on in his life, and he definitely seems desperate to have some type of relationship or friendship or familial type relationship that anchors him, and he
Mhm.
doesn't have that anchor, and he's desperately searching for it. It's pretty sad to think about that. He's not only is he so desperate to find that kind of relationship, but he also finds it or attempts to find it with somebody who has the opposite of good intentions for him. So
Yeah, it puts the lie to kind of the shared justification that both he and Lake use for this
Mhm.
schism.
So then from there, we are introduced to Deuce's sidekick, Sloat Fresno, which is just a real banger of a Pynchon name.
There's a bunch of them in this section.
Yeah, there is. Do we think that? I guess this is a question for. Do we think that Sloat Fresno is named after John D. Sloat, the American Commodore? It would make sense, but I fail to see how that would be relevant.
This is one of those instances where I see it on the Penchon wiki and I'm like, yeah, I see where you're coming from, but I don't think that was intentional. I think it's one of those ones that it just sounds like a fun name to say about, you know? Like I don't think everything that he does, especially character names, is 100% intentional. I think a lot of it's just like I did this kind of stuff when I was running D&D games. Like I would just say random things occasionally, like that would be a really cool character name. I'm gonna make that,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
there's no real meaning to it. It just sounds good to the author, but then someone else can find meaning.
yeah, the name Sloat has always reminded me of the animal stoat.
Mhm.
I don't like it, which kind of makes me picture Sloat as kind of having like a kind of pointier face and stuff. I don't know. It helps me kind of picture him in a weird way.
Definitely Weasley. That's
Yeah, that's it. Just makes me think of weasels, and he kind of makes me picture him as kind of a Weasley type guy.
I've got interpretations. There's the
Threatening.
stoat aspect, which I do think matters a lot because like stoats are some of the most effective hunters on the planet.
Yeah.
They are like perfect at killing small animals.
Are they really?
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
they're incredibly vicious.
I didn't know that.
But also like okay. I'll take you on I'll take you for the leap before we go to the slightly more coherent things. But
Okay.
Sloat, if you wanted to, could be read as slow at Fresno. And knowing that Pynchon is a railroad nerd and hates California, it could just be a dig at California in general, especially given that apparently this one I was not expecting to find anything when I looked into it. Apparently there is like a major freight railroad and Amtrak rail line that goes through Fresno that has to slow down as it's going through Fresno. I'm just gonna call coincidence. Um, slightly less of a contrivance. Sloat is an unincorporated community in Northern California, and if you were going to I get not draw a line, but if you're going to look at Sloat and Fresno on a map, they would kind of carve out this middle section of the U.S. that almost covers most of the territory that the book has covered so far, just in terms of latitude, which is again probably weird coincidence, but who knows? But Sloat, California, is an unincorporated community which is just barely visible on Google Maps, and it seems like it was basically built as a railroad depot for Western Pacific. And Fresno really didn't become anything more than a small farming community until the Eastern Pacific. Nope, not Eastern Pacific. There's some other railroad came through it, and I just all of that is just it's a little too convenient, I guess, for it to not feel at least a little intentional, even though it's also just like a slow-minded stoat.
Yeah, no, that's a lot of that's a lot of cross connections just
Yeah.
between those two words that I did not come up with.
Commodore Sloat is also from upstate New York, who grew up in one of the historic, aristocratic upstate New York Dutch family homes. So it's all there. I don't know what it all is. I don't think it amounts to anything other than, oh, he's a bit slow. He's like a stoat. He's named for a random town.
Just for, I guess, context, John D. Sloat was the Commodore who, during the Mexican-American War, declared California a territory of the U.S. That's who we're talking about.
Mhm.
But yeah, unlikely to be exclusively what he's referring to there. Outside of the name, what do we think of Sloat Fresno as a character? He gets also a bit of an introduction here about
Yeah.
how he was a wanted man for basically scamming the army out of enlistment
I,
bonuses.
I was about to say, let me read that section because I think this is such a good example of Henchon basically giving us so much information about a character in a paragraph, and
Yeah.
it's wonderful. So this is page 195. They got together first in Cripple Creek during their earlier troubles, 1895 or thereabouts. Float had just begun a career as a wanted man for practicing to flagrant excess, what in those days was known as copping the borax. Enlisting in the army, collecting the bonus, deserting, showing up at another post, enlisting, collecting the bonus, deserting again, all through the occupied West, eventually becoming for the military as much of an annoyance as Geronimo himself, with unflattering likenesses tacked up in day rooms, Fort Bliss, corridor lanes. The striking cripple may have looked to Sloat like some harebrained chance to re-ingratiate himself with the forces of law and order. It must have worked because from then on, he and Deuce were considered reliable enough for steady work, and even train fair sometimes to vicinities that swarm with anarchistic heads yet. So yeah, he's basically conning the army into, hey, I'll fight for you. Cool. Here's money. Bye. Goes to the next place. Hey, I'll fight for you. Cool. Here's money. Bye. And just repeating that over and over to the point where they have these like Alabama leprechaun drawings of him up on the wall, like, hey, don't trust this guy.
It's a shame that's a scam you still can't get away with. Some
Yeah,
of
yeah.
those Disney bonuses nowadays are crazy.
It's I mean, they did it in Futurama. That's the Fry joined the army just to get free gum.
You know, if you're really hankering for that kind of thing, Kate, you could come down to New Mexico and start working for the New Mexico what's the correctional services or whatever, because they're willing to give you like a quarter of the year's salary up front.
Really?
Oh, wow.
It's something absurd. Turns out people in New Mexico don't like COs.
They don't want to work for the prison system in New Mexico. I can't imagine.
Not in the state with the highest percentage of privately owned prisons.
Is that true?
I mean, yeah, but it's we've got very little
Hang
going
that
on
on
here.
Arizona.
Well, it's okay. Do you want me to get into a rant about the private prison system being a red herring?
Just spend an hour ranting about the private system.
Yeah,
Prison system.
6% of the prisons are the problem. Yep.
Yeah,
Just 6%. It's a solvable issue.
it totally is. We
We don't need to fix anything else.
So the two of them begin working out the fact that that Webb is actually quite a big fish, in the sense that he is not just sort of a regular mine worker or just a regular shift boss. He's actually a true bona fide anarchist, and that they're essentially going to go after him in particular. We get some other detail in here about sort of the fact that they are going to start kind of following him, and then also the fact that it is going to become easier and easier for Deuce to kind of capture him, because he is now spending a good chunk of time sitting in his tent drinking whiskey, talking about sort of life with him. And again, it's just all very sad. It's all just very tragic. And the more you realize just how much shit Webb is about to be in, the kind of worse I was feeling anyway about where the chapter was headed. Because it's like, dude, just talk to your talk to your kids. Like,
Yeah, for real.
just for the love of God, just talk to your children. And it's here we really get an opportunity to kind of see that, like, one of them breaks him physically, one of them breaks him spiritually in this regard, because building that relationship prior to kind of doing what they're going to do to him would make that even worse. It is bad enough that you're about to be tortured. It is significantly worse if you're being tortured by someone that you've come to see as your son. Yeah, it's pretty rough.
Big DD energy. And DD means divorced dad.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So what you're saying is that in the film adaptation, Webb needs to be played by Ben Affleck, who maybe has the biggest divorced dad energy of anyone in Hollywood.
And he's gonna have one of those motorized tricycles that I'm always seeing all over the damn place with the LED light strips on it.
I don't know. Dennis Quaid's had a bit of a comeback.
Yeah, that's true. He was in The Substance.
Yeah.
Lots of divorced dad going on in the subtext there.
That's true. So then this is where Deuce basically is like, hey, I got a big payday coming towards me. So I love this interaction between him and the mine inspector, where he runs up to him and he's like, hey, I found a bona fide anarchist. And the mine inspector just immediately is like, I don't know you. I've never talked to you. Get the fuck away from me. Um, it's just the worst approach that you possibly could have for some kind of operation like this.
Well, it's because
Um,
Deuce. What is it? It says at the top of 196, Deuce came to imagine himself as quote on assignment for the orders.
right. Yeah.
So he's just like this. He's taken it upon himself to sort of sniff out the bad guys in his mind and take
Yeah.
it to the bosses.
He's an
The-
opportunist.
The quotes around the word detective are doing a lot of work in that
Yeah.
initial sentence.
Yeah.
That is also
Yeah.
true. I guess you could also say that I was a detective if the actual murderer confessed to me in a bar because he thought I was his daughter. Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess if I then take that information to the police, I am also a detective.
It is one of my favorite tropes, though. Just the dumbass hitmen thinking that they are high and mighty.
Yeah,
Yeah.
David Fincher made a whole movie about that.
Yeah.
That was one of the greatest bait and switches that has ever been pulled on me in my entire cinema going
I have not
life.
yet seen it, so
Oh, dude, I'm so
I'm
sorry.
so far behind. No, I'm so far behind on movie watching. Don't worry, like it'll be a while before I even get to it, probably.
The whole point of the killer is that he is bad at his job.
I believe it. I believe
Yeah,
it.
but the entire the entire marketing and like the entire like first like 20 minutes of that movie is him doing the contract killer like, internal monologue like professional
Yeah.
thing, and then he just misses. He like he's lined up to kill this person and then just completely whiffs the shot, and if I remember correctly, kills like an innocent bystander instead. And then the rest of the movie is him attempting to maintain that like air of professionalism while just continuing to get in his own way because he's not good at it.
That reminds me of. I don't want to get on too much of a tangent here, but I don't know if any of y'all ever saw the Matador with Pierce Brosnan.
No.
It reminds me of that, where he's a hitman who basically finds himself in a situation where he kind of, for lack of a better term, gets the yips and just can't do his job anymore. And it was a really underappreciated movie. It was Pierce Brosnan and Greg Kinnear. And it was a very dark comedy, like very much in line with something like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, or one of those like The Nice Guys, like where kind of a really dark play on that, like taking a bad person but making them a sympathetic character.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
There you go. There's some Homer for all the listeners. Watch The Killer and the Matador.
Yep.
After his failed attempt to kind of give an update on his infiltration work, he just decides to it's unclear if Webb is being framed or if he does actually steal. Webb's defense seems to be that everybody steals, so like what's the big deal?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that is the way in which he's kind of taken into custody, so to speak, is they have somebody take rocks from his person that would in theory belong to the company, and then that's how they kind of get him out and lock him up.
And I love that interaction too, where it's he's basically, the company inspector's like, hey, we know you've been stealing, and he's like, who the fuck isn't? We all are.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
guys are doing it worse, the worst of all of us, but everybody's skimming, dude. We all know this.
It is a good interaction. And then after that, he is woken up and is bound, and the two of them basically seem to take a railroad coupling pin. Does anyone know how large that is? Like the reference photos I was able to find didn't have scale in it.
It doesn't have scale, but it's like, I think it's like a 7-pound piece of metal, something like that.
Yeah.
It's big. It's
Yeah.
I found one a long time ago when there was a railroad track that ran behind my house. and every now and then we would find like random train parts that come off that weren't railroad ties. And yeah, we at some point found a coupling pin, and they're bigger than you would think.
Yeah, like I want to say 5-7 inches long, depending.
Yeah, something like that. A little less
like
than a
an
foot,
inch and a half
but not,
around.
yeah. They've got some heft, that's for sure.
Yeah, so they wrap that up in a newspaper because, we want to do this in a way that doesn't leave marks. And basically break his hands and feet, if I understand it correctly, is what they do.
Yeah.
Which is just awful. That's such a terror. Like, there's so many small bones and ligaments and tendons and in those appendages that to have them broken, and then also to understand that in 1901 there's basically no good medical care yet. It's kind of still emerging, and even then, like, you're not going to get it, so you're just in pain, and then they throw you on the back of a horse and you have to be jostled that way,
Mm-hmm.
for God knows how. It's just terrible.
Yep.
And then, we get another really, really tragic line in here where it says that he found himself crying out the names of his sons. From inside the
That
pain,
one.
he was distantly surprised at a note of reproach in his voice, though not sure if it had been out loud or inside his own thoughts. He watched the light over the ranges slowly draining away. I wanted to ask if we had any thoughts on that line in particular, because obviously it is the name of the first part of this book. And to me, what that seems to signal is this idea that, like, the light over the ranges was, for Webb anyway, the world that he kind of was working towards or saw as possible through maybe a more civilized workplace, a more liberal unionized workplace where you're not taken advantage of, and where he would be happy and people would be happy and well paid and well fed, and that, much like in a lot of things that we've talked about in his books, that there was this like possibility of a really, really good future as a result of these changes. And then, in the very Pinchonian way of forces and counterforces, something kind of takes that light away, turns it to dark. And we move both from that phase of the book to a darker phase of the book here, but also it is really kind of Webb being pulled out of that possibility and into something else. And the main reason why it is that I kind of give that analysis to it is because of the usage of the word Jeshimon or Yeshimon. If you're speaking in Hebrew, Yeshimon is a location in the Old Testament. It's now known as En-Gedi. It is basically a portion of the wilderness that the Israelites wandered through in the Bible. Even if you haven't read the Bible, most people understand that after the Israelites left Egypt, they wandered around for 40 years. Part of that sort of wandering was through this area of Yeshimon. And the interesting thing is that if you actually go through like the etymology of it, it is an area that serves no purpose, right? So like for a long time, some people would think that maybe Yeshimon was part of like the desert of Sinai or some of the other areas of kind of that Sinai Peninsula up into Israel, Palestine region. But those areas, both within biblical references, but also just like how they exist in real life, were good for rearing some types of animals. Some areas you could grow stuff in, but it was not widespread. Yeshimon basically has no purpose. It it is just like salted wasteland. You can't grow anything there. There is nothing for you to graze animals on. You can't build anything there. It is sort of purposeless land. So it seems particularly relevant that Pynchon is taking that name, and that is where they're bringing Webb to, out of sort of something that could have been possible, this like possibility, or this light that maybe existed just on the other side of a hill, right? It's over the ranges, so it's not immediate. You have to get to it. And Webb just no longer sees it, no longer sees the possibility of it. And ironically, it was the instrument of what he thought was his own freedom that helped engineer his own sort of demise.
This is again playing with that duality theme that runs through the book. You have that line at the top of the page of 198, he watched the light over the slowly drain. And then literally the last sentence, by which time Webb and his murderers had vanished from the street of Cortez, shadow had fled. So it goes from that hope of that light that exists, like you said, over the horizon, that he is holding on to and kind of wanting to keep, and then it goes to this darkness that just casts a shadow over everything. All hope is gone at that point. And it really is a great chapter.
All of this conversation has been great notes. I would like to just add something that just occurred to me. The light over the ranges phrase in particular. It's a neat bit of wordplay thing. Thanks to our pal Pinch.
Good buddy.
Yeah, ranges. It feels like either the distances or over the like the mountain ranges. And if you're talking about waiting for the light to come over the ranges when you're in an area with relatively flat horizons, then sun's gonna come up at hypothetically 6 a.m. on the dot every day, or at least around the equinoxes. And that's not the case. You're still waiting for the light over the ranges if you are living in the shadow of a mountain range. And the only thing that has changed there is the height of the ridge. Even though you're much closer, it might be even 9 before you actually see sunlight. And there's just I don't know. That's a dynamic.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then, sort of before this chapter ends, we're treated to a comical interaction between someone watching, who sees Deuce and Sloat carrying Webb out of town, realizes that he he gave his gun away in the saloon that has a no guns policy, so just runs up to a random prostitute and starts feeling around for a gun that he assumes is there. And then the fact that not only does she have one, but it's in the wrong spot from where he was looking, and then says it's available for rent.
Yeah.
But by the time he's able to kind of get all of this done, he runs out and they're already well on their way out of town. Yeah, an excellent sort of short chapter. Do we have any thoughts on it that we didn't kind of cover through the course of the conversation?
I have two things. One of them is kind of minor, but I was doing some research on the name Sloat, the word Sloat, and there were apparently 2 different destroyers in the U.S. Navy named the USS Sloat, and Pynchon himself served on a destroyer in the U.S. Navy in the 50s. The 2 destroyers were from the 30s and the 40s. But I imagine it's possible that Pynchon served in the Navy with somebody who had been on one of those 2 destroyers, and that's maybe his first exposure to the name Sloat. It's obviously complete speculation and is neither here nor there, but I found it somewhat interesting to link it to his time in the Navy.
Yeah.
And my second thing is this whole chapter. It did occur to me that you could write an entire novel with this chapter's plot, where you do some like 10 to 20 pages of Webb hanging out with his family with Lake and Maeva, and then Lake runs off, she comes back, you could stretch out this chapter into 200, 300 pages in my opinion, and write a pretty interesting and good novel, which that's one of my favorite things about Against the Day, is just how much is packed in there, where even though it's 1100 pages, single chapters in the book could make entire books in and of themselves. So much ground is covered in this novel. It's honestly, it's awe-inspiring.
That's a great point. This very easily could be quite a powerful novel on its own. From there, we go into chapter 17, and we meet back up with 2 of the other Traverse boys. This time, it is Reef and Frank. And this chapter starts with with Reef showing up, basically saying that he needs some backup for a wedding that he has to go to. So the two of them, after sort of sorting out his responsibilities with the school that Frank is going to, get on a train and head out to said wedding is it in Utah?
The Pynchon Wiki folks think it's in Colorado.
Sure.
Well, all this stuff about Mormons makes me think it's in Utah.
That's what makes me
Yeah.
think it's Utah too.
Especially since that religion was started not too terribly long before the events of the book. Or
Yeah,
this
because
chapter, at least.
because Reef finds Frank in Golden, Colorado, but then they spent what seemed like a week on the train, which I feel like wouldn't put them directly in Colorado again. But definitely the presence of all of the Mormons does make me think that it is Utah, but it doesn't specifically say, I don't think.
Well, they're specifically referred to as Utahns in
Yeah.
dialogue,
Mhm.
which would imply them out of place. But yeah, and it could be Utah. I don't think it really matters where.
No, not too much. But they end up sort of coming out of the depot at a place called Nochecita, and there is a lovely description here of kind of what the town is like, which sort of pairs nicely with the kind of wretched hive of scum and villainy from the previous chapter. Where with that description being what it was, the one here on page 200 goes, there was an ice house and a billiard parlor, a wine room, a lunch and eating counter, gambling saloons, and taquerias. In the part of town across from the tracks from all of that, Estrella Briggs, whom everyone called Stray, was living upstairs in what had been once the domestic palace of a mine owner from the days of the great first ore strikes around here. Now a dimly illicit refuge for secret lives, darkened in places unrepainted wood rearing against a sky which since this morning had been threatening storm. Walkways in from the street were covered with corrugated snow shed roofing. The restaurant and bar on the ground floor corner had been there since the boom times, offering 2-bit all-you-can-eat specials, sawdust on the floor, heavy-duty crockery, smells of steaks, chops, venison chili, coffee, and beer, and so on, worked into the wood of the wall paneling. Old trestle tables, bar, and bar stools. At all hours, the place be racketing with gambling hall workers on their breaks, big-hearted winners and bad losers, detectives, drummers, adventuresses, pigeons, and sharpers. A sunken chamber almost like a natatorium at some hot springs resort. So cool and dim that you forgot after a while about the desert waiting out there to resume for you soon as you step back into it. Yeah, it's every once in a while Pynchon does writing about a place that just not only gives you such a great visual of what it looks like. I think it was Luke who said at the beginning of this episode about how everything in chapter 17 is really easy to visualize, but also just like, man, it'd be cool to just sort of like walk around there for a little bit.
Right.
And that's definitely the reaction that I had to kind of this environment that he's describing. What do we think of Stray and her situation? This like first paragraph of page 201 after the page break, it says that she was not only pregnant in the sense that she was showing it, but also like you could tell she was pregnant from seemingly like her aura or vibe when you came across her. And that she apparently has like a series of ex-boyfriends that is it a case where they all could be the father? Is it a case where they all don't want her to get married to the person she's getting married to, and so they're kind of showing up to provide competition? And then there's this line at the end here that says, a set of born-again friends, though more in this official, maybe even sheriff's office way, friends more newly made than these Mormons, but no less clamoring for the girl's time, uneasy, in fact desperate to see her safe and married, who would stand literally in a circle around the couple as if enforcing the choice and allowing them no other. What do we think about the situation that she's in this whole marriage scenario?
Well, it's Sage who's in the situation, correct?
No, it's Stray.
I thought it was Sage. I don't know.
I just never really resolved that question in my mind, because I get why why both of y'all think differently.
Mhm.
I'm not sure. But as far as like the dynamics of the situation, regardless of whether it's Estrella or Sage, like it's. I mean, look, this is what Mormons do. That's a bit of an over. It might be an immense overstatement, but it is like I don't know. It's kind of the whole deal with Mormonism, isn't it?
This was maybe the only difficult part of this chapter for me to get was like what the whole sort of deal is.
Yeah, I mean, it's
'cause-
made evident at the end of the chapter that Stray's pregnant with Reef's kid. No, I'm sorry, Frank's
Mhm.
kid.
It's Reef, I
So
think,
that
right?
much is it Reef? See, now I'm getting myself turned around.
I think
It is
I think
Reef.
it is Reef. Yeah, it is Reef. Yeah.
It
It's
is Reef.
Reef.
Yeah,
Reef goes and gets Frank for backup when he goes to
That's
the
right.
wedding.
Yeah. So it's made clear at the end that it is Reef's child, but it's also it's also implied that it could have really been anybody, and that's just the way things were in that town in that time. You know,
Mhm.
it's a really interesting way to introduce her. I think is to
Mhm.
kind of show that immediately that she's kind of everybody's had some time with her, so, but she's also she's still a strong and capable woman. Not not, painted, not being painted as this kind of like town bicycle situation. Yeah, she gets around, but she's still fully capable of running things that she needs to run and taking charge of things, having
Yeah.
life. You know.
Yeah. I can also, for what it's worth, Luke, like totally see where your interpretation comes from, because it does say there were also her friend Sage's Mormon ex-foster parents, which is a crazy sentence in terms of the relation that it's describing. So, like, the best that I can come up with is that Stray got pregnant, is gonna get married, and all of these other ex-boyfriends have shown up, and at the same time, her friend Sage's Mormon ex-foster parents have shown up, seemingly just to pressure the married couple to make sure they get married.
Mm.
Which is just it. Yeah, I guess Mormons just be doing that. I don't know. I can't say I've ever been friends with a Mormon. But
I had a couple of
yeah,
friends in high school who were Mormon. I will say this: they were some of the nicest people I knew. Like
yeah,
in high school, they used to invite me and my wife over to literally just to explain their religion, like never to push it on us, but to answer our questions.
mhm,
Because at the time, that was high school is when I really kind of defined myself as an atheist and was kind of an asshole about it a lot of the times, if I'm being honest.
nice.
But I always also wanted to learn more about other people's religion, and they were some of the most inviting people in that respect. Like simply because it was a matter of come here, ask whatever questions you have, and we'll answer them. And we're never going to try to make you feel uncomfortable. We're never going to try to say you should buy into this. We just want to, you want to know, we'll be happy to answer. So
Sure.
they were super cool.
And I mean, in Mormonism's defense, and I don't, like Mormons were treated pretty, and I don't know like exactly why, and I'm sure that there are probably good reasons why. I mean, the whole polygamy thing, but they have a history of being quite I'm persecuted, yeah, like heavily persecuted in America. And the fact that they are in modern times, at least that's, I mean, yeah, that's. I've had some Mormon friends. The one I'm thinking of is now ex-Mormon and has left the religion. But yeah, they are generally incredibly nice people.
Look, what I'll say is some of my closest friends are Mormons, but when you get a bunch of them together, But more seriously, the no, I know a lot of Mormons, and genuinely, as individual people, on average, I would say they are some of the genuinely kindest people. If I was going to represent my relationships with all people, the Mormon colored ones would be some of the more sincere.
One of the most interesting books that I've ever read on Mormonism, because I did have to, when I was in seminary, write a term paper on it, is about Joseph Smith. I don't remember who wrote it, but if I remember correctly, the title is "No Man Knows My History," which is just about Joseph Smith as a figure and basically a biography of him. And it's pretty crazy. If you're genuinely interested in like learning kind of the foundational elements of the religion and also foundational elements of like its founder's life, that is definitely a book that I would recommend. Anyway, the wedding's a mess. There's Mormons chanting at people in circles. There's women coming and going, packing or unpacking from various vacations. Eventually, they're given a bed amongst a dozen or so empty ones. This whole thing just seems wedding planning, as someone who needs to do that in the distant future, is already like kind of a nightmare just conceptually. And thinking about it for any length of time kind of, I think, just makes me feel like how confused and messy this whole chapter presents whatever this wedding actually is. I know that's not what it's going to be like when I do eventually get married, but it is hard to not just like let all of the different like logistical scheduling thoughts not lead you down a pathway of just like insanity. And that to see that reflected on the page of the book I'm reading I felt seen in a way. So it's this whole mess. There's a bunch of ex-boyfriends coming and going. And then we're introduced to one of them named Cooper. And this is a whole weird thing. What do we make of Cooper? This is just such a strange aside, and I don't know if it means anything. It seems like it's just weird for maybe the sake of being weird, but that could also be me diminishing it. It's so random.
It's okay. So look, I have a couple of different things I want to go over with this because I'm 100% with you. So the Pinchon wiki tries to do this like real Pepe Silva thing of saying that it's a stand-in for Pinchon, which no, I just don't. There's just nothing, and it even gets to the point where they're like, yeah, but it probably is. The other thing it made me think of, and clearly this is not a case of book being inspired by this, but this is just what immediately came to mind is Michael Cera's turn in Twin Peaks: The Return.
Same.
Yeah.
His name being Cooper does not help that association either.
No. And there's another Twin Peaks little reference that I think comes up a little bit later in here. But yeah, that's exactly what I thought of. Because as much, and we're not getting into the weeds, but as much as I love The Return, that scene, I was just like, what the fuck does this have to do with anything at all? Other than Michael Cera's here and he might be Marlon Brando, but he's not.
Trying to parse The Return in general is just impossible. To go back to Against the Day, though, it does. I mean, the fact that Cooper rides a motorcycle and is obviously a musician of some talent, it does. And the Pinchon Wiki points this out somewhat. It is at least somewhat reminiscent of Richard Farina, which I think Gravity's Rainbow is dedicated to Richard Farina, I want to say, and also features at least one passage that seems to be kind of directly references death. Gravity's Rainbow does, but yeah, I mean, that's what I get out of that section the most is the Richard Farina connection. It is, I mean, even I know you're talking about The Return and all that stuff being random in The Return, but even in this book, it does scan as somewhat maybe not random. It's just this chapter wouldn't be that much different without Cooper in it, even though he is mentioned a bunch. I don't know what purpose he really serves other than kind of like local color, I guess.
Yeah.
He plays microtonal guitars, so that's like pretty cool.
I like that part of it. That part I can get behind.
Well, I mean, he's kind of like a weird, very, very Mormon version of like the rule of cool, to borrow the TV tropes phrase.
Okay.
Just taken to that extreme. Like, he is cool, right? Like, he's riding around on a motorcycle, even though it's in the text described as utterly impractical. And he's playing a guitar incorrectly, but just right. And his teeth aren't perfect, but they're distinctive. And he's got white rubber tires and a brass headlamp. He's just cool as hell. And he's a little bit he's a little bit gonna get me talking about whatever happened to Gary Cooper. Like he's just kind of this amalgam of the like early the mid-century ideal of masculinity, and at the same time he like rolls into this town, sings like a pretty okay song, and clearly performs it well, and in the end, sorry to skip ahead, but does like essentially convince Sage to ignore all the other suitors, to ignore all of the pressures around her, and to because she's just swooning over this guy's sick riffs.
Yeah, and then like I don't know, something about Sage's sort of appearance and then going off with him really reminds me of Stella walking down the staircase in Streetcar Named Desire, which is another direct connection to Marlon Brando. So yeah, it's just a real random scene, and yeah, maybe the right way to think about it is that it's the rule of Mormon cool. Anyway, from there, Frank finds himself unable to sleep, and so he ends up going up to help a local school teacher prepare meals for the next day. And this is where we get some more sort of detail on Reef's whole involvement in all of this, and then also just kind of what this place is, or kind of what is kind of going on, at least to the degree that we get any detail. This would sort of be one of them. And I guess Cody, as a big fan of Estrella and this kind of providing some information about her, like, do you have any specific thoughts on this conversation between the two of them?
I didn't really note anything particularly. It's a great conversation. I think that's part of what I like about this chapter is just not just this chapter, but both chapters really is the major conversations that take place in both are so well done and just do so much to kind of fill us in on their at this time. But no, I didn't have anything in particular about this conversation.
Anybody else have any thoughts on the talk between Frank and the teacher?
I just really like it. I think it's a very sweet moment of like unconventional romance. Just nice.
Like a meet cute, so to speak.
One could say.
From there, we now get to the point where a call is placed almost sort of supernaturally, in which Jimmy Drop gets in touch with Reef and explains to him that his dad has been sort of kidnapped and is in the process of being marched out to Jeshimon. And he knows exactly who's doing it. And apparently Deuce Kindred and Slow Fresno are well known enough that, it is not a surprise that they're doing this kind of thing, or that they've done it again, so to speak. People know who they are. And after that, Reef hangs up the phone and goes and speaks to Frank and basically tells him, I need to go save Dad if I can. I need you to go back home and check in on Mom and make sure everything is okay. And then before he leaves, though, he goes and checks in again with Stray, and they have a talk, and then the two of them leave to their various destinations to try and intervene in sort of what's already underway. And that brings us to the end of chapter 17. Those last couple of segments, do we have any thoughts on them?
I do like when Jimmy Drop calls to talk to Reef. There's that brief little exchange of Reef, that you? Where are you? Timmy, you're calling me.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but just a nice little way to punctuate that
Yeah.
sad scene.
I do love the line in that scene where it says this was part of the strangeness of telephones in those early days before the traffic became quite such a routine affair, as if over designed to include all sorts of extra features like precognitive alarms. So if there's any other thoughts, do we have any other thoughts on chapter 17 as a whole before we move into our wrap up?
It's just it does a really good job of just setting up what's to come and setting the stakes at the same. I mean, we know that Webb is in a not great situation, but now we also are starting to see the impacts of how this is affecting his children, or at least two of them. And so the reverberations of this are spreading as quickly as it can in this time. And so it's kind of, even though these two chapters have been a little bit more relaxed in terms of pacing and in terms of plot events, now at the end of it, we're starting to kind of raise the stakes a little bit, push the action forward, and leave on a little bit of what's going to go on, what's going to happen next.
To go back to the song, I don't have too much to say about it, but it does. It is the lyrics remind me of a few different classic rock acts. I mean the couplet, "Ride the Sky, Dare the Storm," seems that obviously, to me at least, kind of is reminiscent of the Doors' "Riders on the Storm." Generally, that song's lyrics remind me of like Neil Young, something Neil Young would.
I was going to say Neil Young very much.
Yeah, Neil Young in the early 70s. Either Neil Young and Crazy Horse, or Crazy Horse or Neil Young solo, like one of the three.
I was going to say specifically like Comes a Time era Neil Young.
Yeah. Well, I think you could make it's pretty solid song lyrics. Just in terms of, it's romantic, it's evocative. It's not played for laughs, which is the majority of Pynchon's songs are supposed to be comedic. It's a little bit more serious. I like the lyrics a good amount.
Well, if anyone wants to try and put them to music, you know where to send that.
Yeah, the scansion's tricky on that one. I really like the kind of the complete inversion of the families splitting apart in these chapters, where you have Frank and Reef both kind of looking at, in some sense, possibilities of love that might give them roots, because this feels like it could be a community. Sure, it's full of gambling halls and saloons and stuff, but if we're honest with ourselves, what town isn't?
Right.
Just some sweet fantasies at the very least.
Well, it's also somewhat of an example of what you were talking about earlier, Will, from a perspective of like you have one family completely falling apart and nobody rescuing it, and then in the second one you have a family coming together and a community forcefully or otherwise helping to coalesce that burgeoning family together.
One other note, and this is somewhat of a question, but there's a line about Cooper's smile that makes me think that he has a hair lip. I was perhaps born with a hair lip. It says that there was a deep injury of some kind in his past, but it says something about his upper lip, which tucked over his teeth in a protective way. That makes me think that Cooper, and obviously that's a very small detail that doesn't matter at all, but I didn't see anything on the Pitch and Wiki about it, and it just struck me that
that's where they tried to link it to being done. I don't know that it would be a hair lip, because I don't know that surgery existed at that time to fix it. But I don't know what else it would be. And I kind of sat on that for a while too, and I couldn't figure out why I was focused so much on it. But yeah, something clearly happened, and for whatever reason, he's got I don't know if it's like a Freddie Mercury thing where his front teeth are just kind of protruding a lot, and so he has to consciously kind of keep his lip over it.
I interpreted it as that, and kind of just tying into the overall kind of gag of this this dude who just shows up out of nowhere, being so much of like a prototype rock star, where
Mhm.
they're brooding on stage, caring so much about their art.
Also, the whole thing about, I think it's either Reef or Frank, or Reef is saying, 3 weeks wages for one of those things might be worth it. Couldn't be that hard to learn how to play. I remember whenever I was younger, especially, there's always, whenever, I used to kind of make jokes about people being the type to pull out the guitar at the party and start singing. But as a young man, as a former young man, there is that kind of whole.
As a former young man.
As a former, there's that whole like this other guy's getting attention for being good at music, so maybe I should get good at music so I can get attention too. Thing that's just very very male, or maybe not even male, just very human, and kind of
Very
like
primal.
a very young person thing to think or say.
Yeah. Well, and I think it, to kind of build off of that point that you're making, the appropriate response of, you think it help you, is pretty great.
Yeah, Frank has some pretty good lines in this chapter.
Yeah.
There's a line about him showing up just so he can be he's a family idiot, so tagging along in case anybody needs some emergency drooling done or whatever. Which, if somebody said that to me in real life, I would get a pretty good laugh out of it.
Frank is just great overall. I think he's a deeply likable character because of the fact that the whole gimmick is that he's just what he seems to be. And what he seems to be is like an okay kind of guy. And it's just nice to have an okay kind of guy just in the middle of all of this chaos.
Yeah, just like a grounding force, essentially.
Exactly.
So, do we have any funny parts we wanted to mention, besides those that we went through as we covered the chapters?
Yeah, I had one that we didn't bring up. It's the other Twin Peaks reference that I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
206, during the conversation between um, Frank and Stray, they're having this really, important conversation and very meaningful conversation. And then it says, and this I'm kind of coming. Only it wouldn't begin because here came loud intrusion from the street, Utahns and high frolics stopping up the stairs, singing pieces of what sounded like some very weird hymn tunes at each other, which just reminded me of the Great Northern in the first season of Twin Peaks when Cooper's trying to sleep and Norwegians came storming in, and later the Icelandics came storming in, singing songs, chanting, just being generally annoying.
Well, and my funny moment, actually, I thought you were about to mention it, comes right before then, where it's just the idea that Reef is just spending all his days rigging faro dealing boxes.
Yeah.
It's just a hilarious amount of work to put into to make a living.
What do we think our most pinch on part of the chapter is?
So for me, it's in chapter 16. It's how the different sections kind of meld into one another. Where on 192, he had his almighty damn union. That's what he loved, if he loved anything. And then the next kind of section break, and then it's if it was love, it was less than two-way. I want to say he does that other places in these two chapters as well. But that one especially it's something that I don't know if I've really read other authors who've done it, but Vincent does it in a very virtuosic way. And that transition in particular I really loved, and it's something that he does at least sometimes in this book and his other books, and it's always something I really enjoy.
I think for me, it's Cooper. Just this random character who comes out of nowhere for no reason, but is endearing to the reader and to everyone in the story, and is good at guitar, but isn't, but is. And it's a very Pinchonian character, and the fact that he literally just pops in like that is just very Pinchonian.
Yeah. I'm actually going to steal mine from something Luke said earlier in the episode. Luke, you brought up the fact that chapter 16 could be a novel on its own. I feel like that is something that is very distinctly Pinchonian, especially in this particular book, because that's probably happened. I don't even know how many times at this point, 200 pages into the novel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to also steal from previous conversation. I'm just gonna say that the fact that they used a railroad pin, like that is
Yeah.
just all that's all Pynchon there. It's trash. It's picked up by these scumbags, and it's used to break this man's hands and feet. It's symbolic, but it's also just brutally honest about how that works.
Yeah, true enough. Okay, so that brings us to quotes. Anyone want to go first?
I will actually, because I have mine right. So this again ties back to Cooper. This is right after the song on page 203. The small vibrato-less voices caught Cooper's fingers tweaking along the wire wrap string, creaky percussion of wagon traffic in dirt streets, the onset of siesta time, pearl and wind sky, and who meanwhile had materialized at the upstairs window. The boy's ironclad lips lit up into the most unexpected of smiles, not very controlled, way too knowing. Sage appeared on the outside stairs, and some dancers practice stern, palest gray, all legs and sobriety coming down so smoothly, without a thought for steps that detailed the all as easy and light as a breath. That before the young motor wheelman could do so much point, she'd slipped a bare forearm into her shirt sleeve, up alongside his own arm, and he was trying to focus on baby blues. How close she was, how close she was standing, though she still hadn't quite. It's just like Luke mentioned at the beginning of the episode. Like these chapters are so easy to visualize, and just that description of the sort of squeak on the guitar string, which is a sound I genuinely love when it's song. And the very short sentences that are doing so much work to describe things, the onset of siesta time, the pearl and windless sky, like just great piece of writing and just a great job scene set.
Yeah, that was gonna be my quote, especially the onset of siesta time, the pearl and windless sky. The pearl and windless sky, that sentence, man, like that's a sentence. That's a fucking good sentence.
Really, really good.
It was also my pick too. So.
Oh man, I came back swinging, huh?
Dang, yeah. My quote comes from 205, where it says, "Her laughter, accompanied by a slap of his foot, still had enough of a saltwater element back of it for even Frank to pick up. He lay there supine, wanting nothing right now but, say, was he serious? To hold her, yes, and rest his head against where that baby was and just listen, somehow remaining easy enough with that to allow her, whenever she wanted to stop whatever would happen, only it wouldn't begin. His ear came loud intrusion from the street. Utahns in high frolic stomping up the stairs, singing pieces of what sounded like some very weird hymn tunes at each other. Well, now shit, declared Stray, looking quickly down to address her stomach. You didn't hear that? Guess we'd better have one of these lights on. In the electric light, they had a good long look at each other's face, and though he couldn't speak for her, Frank knew that in years to come it would likely get him past many a hard mile to remember this couple 3 seconds of a soul-to-soul baby, or howsoever. The C chord in the day's melody he could always return to would be this serious young woman sitting down at the end of the bed, and the look those eyes seemed for a minute there to be giving him. But then everything saddled up and proceeded down Mexico way. I love that section.
That's great.
Like Will talked about, how that whole kind of scene just represents like a nice little sort of romantic moment. I like that is a feeling that I know very well that Pynchon is describing Frank having. Like this idea of this like simple couple of seconds that just kind of sticks with you and that you think about, and sort of the kind of torrent of emotions that exists in that. You know, whether it's, and that can be triggered by anything, right? There's several things in this scene that do it. The fact that there's his sort of romantic inclinations, but then also just like having a couple seconds contact with a baby in the womb still. That's, I don't care who you are, holding a baby or experiencing that is a pretty profound moment when it happens for the first time. And he is able to capture that in a way that I think is really, really wonderful. And in a way that sort of really depicts its lasting effects on a person. And it's not something that I feel like I've seen in a book before.
It really is a beautiful writing, and I love the use of the C chord to describe that, because that chord has a very warm and welcoming, kind of calming feel to it. So it's the perfect chord to fit that.
Well, I was actually going to ask how long y'all thought Fincher might have sat on figuring out how to come up with an actually poetic pun on the tonic. But I have found a replacement for the one that Cody pilfered. Hopefully,
I
it's
won't
long
apologize.
enough. But hopefully, it's long enough to let Luke find his. Back on page 191. I'm so bad, she kept telling herself, but couldn't believe it till she was in Silverton again, where a bad girl could find her own true self, like coming home to a real family. Just like a little grid of streets set in a green flat below the mountain peaks, but for wickedness it was one of the great metropolises of the fallen earth. Jitner and Jesus, 60 or 70 saloons and 20 parlor houses just on Blair Street alone. Drinking, gambling, fucking 24 hours a day. Repeal? What repeal? Smoking opium with Chinamen who came in and did the girls' laundry. Handled by the foreign visitors from far across the sea with dangerous tastes, as well as domestic American child corrupters, life cripplers, murderers, Republicans. Hard to say which of them, her or Rika, had less sense about who she went upstairs with. Somehow they glided through the nights as if under supernatural protection, learned not to let their eyes meet, because they were always starting laughing. And some customers got violent about that. Sometimes they woke up in the little jailhouse and heard the usual from a sheriff's wife with an ineradicable frown. It went on until winter began to make itself felt, and the prospect of snow up on the eaves got all the ladies on the line to making those seasonal readjustments. And it's not an incredible paragraph in by the metrics that I usually pick them by for this segment, but it is like a kind of an incredible demonstration of the way that like this is framed as lakes kind of reminiscent almost on the things that she's enjoying about this life, and it is also exactly what Webb is like terrified for. Like everything that she finds thrilling and interesting and exciting and something that she can go forward into her life feeling proud for having weathered is exactly what Webb is. It's what brings him to rate. And that's the fact that it could have been either of their characters having those thoughts is impressive as hell.
That was my backup quote too.
Woohoo!
That's a really good one.
Yeah, actually, and I wanted to add that the lack of commas and drinking, gambling, fucking 24 hours a day is really good in that paragraph. Where it's just kind of anyway. So mine comes from 189, the first page of this section. I'm going to skip a little bit into the paragraph. It's the opening paragraph. Luckily, the snow was still a while off, or there might have been a repeat of last winter when he let some Finns talk him into putting on a pair of skis up past Smuggler by the giant pre-avalanche buildup known as the Big Elephant. Scared the bejesus out of him, as it would of anybody in their right mind. All present being mightily relieved when he fell down safely in the snow without breaking any bones or starting a slide. I like that little section, partially because I've only gone skiing once. It was when I was a child. It did not go well. I didn't get injured. It's just I just kept on falling over and stuff. But I do imagine that if I was in Webb's place at that time, somebody got me drunk. It was like, hey, like let's go skiing. I imagine I know how I am whenever I'm drunk, and I imagine that I'd probably be like, oh, fuck it, let's do it, and would probably be quite relieved at the end of it that I didn't fuck it up too bad. So I found that very relatable and just kind of a fun little section. One of the only kind of lighthearted parts of Webb's life that we get to see, I guess, too. So
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of this episode of Mapping the Zone. Cody, what are we doing for our next episode?
Next episode will be chapters 18 and 19. So the last sentence that we're ending on is, and there was that gaze again. Hours can be consumed. Hat pin issues alone. So 209 to 232, the next section.
All right. As sort of a brief aside, I know that we really haven't mentioned anything with the show kind of shuffling hosts a little bit in the past couple of episodes. We are aware that there is a new Thomas Pynchon book coming out. That is something that is firmly there is. Yeah, it's called Shadow Ticket, and it has an
What?
indeterminate number of pages.
Oh,
We are aware that the book is coming out. There are a couple of people that we've had that have asked us to kind of provide like an episode thinking or speculating on it. We think it's best to just wait until the book comes out. There are synopsises provided by the publisher that certainly everyone can go and read. This being Pynchon, it's pretty difficult to extract anything meaningful out of those synopsises beyond what it says is going to be in it, So,
which may not even be in it, to be fair.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna kind of reserve any comments that we may have until that book comes out, and then we're able to read it. We are actively in the process of attempting to get a hold of advanced readers' copies. Our word that we've received from the publisher on that is that they are basically compiling the list of who's going to be getting them right now. And once they have that set and the book is closer to publication, that is when those will be sent out to the people who will get them. So if we do end up being sort of the lucky recipients of advanced reader copies, believe us, you guys will be the first to know. And sort of our plan for that is for all four of us to independently kind of read that as quick as we can, while also digesting the information to the degree that we can, and then maybe taking a break from Against the Day to do an episode or maybe two discussing what we thought of it, maybe in a non-spoiler sense and then also a spoiler sense, and just kind of give you guys our impressions while we take a longer amount of time to more properly sort of digest and research and study it. Obviously we will have the benefit with all of the books that we have been covering and the ones that have already published of there being a lot of material, be that just the Pynchon Wiki in some cases, or a lot of resource books that have been published in literary criticism publications in many cases, for us to kind of pull this information from. For obvious reasons, that is not going to be the case for Shadow Ticket. So it will take us longer to be able to actually fully kind of ingratiate ourselves with the text and be able to do a season-long kind of analysis or discussion of it. But we do have a plan to at least cover it once that gets closer to coming out. I guess just kind of as a random aside from everybody, like obviously we're excited about it. I think that we all agree that it's pretty shocking that there is another book at all, and that this is just a sort of an exciting thing to be able to experience again. Right, the fact that he's releasing another one. I think that we all would not have been surprised if there wasn't another one, both just based off of how old Thomas Pynchon is, but also based on thematically what the content of his most recently published book was. So yeah, that is sort of our plan for Shadow Ticket once that comes up. As always, thank you for listening. And if you want to send us any comments, questions, feedback, crazy conspiracy theories about the books that we're covering, or the books that we have yet to cover or have already covered, you can reach out to us in a number of different ways. You can email us at mappingthezonepod@gmail.com. We are on Twitter at Pinchon Podcast, but that's going to be hard for you to get a hold of us there because we really only use that as a platform for updating people nowadays. We're also on Blue Sky at Pinchon Pod, or is it Mapping the Zone podcast on Blue Sky, or Cody?
That I believe it is the former. Give me a second.
Okay. You can also find us on Instagram at Mapping the Zone Pod. And you can also donate to the show if you think our show is worth any of your hard-earned money. We can be found on Ko-Fi at Mapping the Zone Podcast. All of that money is used to invest back into the show. We've been able to buy multiple members of this show recording equipment. We've been able to use to pay our hosting fees, and as well as finance, kind of upgrades like the show artwork or just the overall audio quality of the program. And again, any donations that we get going forward will be used for the exact same purposes. And yeah, without further ado, thank you guys for listening again, and we will see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.
Jesus. Bye.
Bye.